Former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick is serving a 28-year sentence for conspiracy and fraud. Recently, there's been a groundswelling of people saying he should be pardoned early, including billionaire Peter Karmanos, Sharon McPhail, and over a dozen local pastors. One thing that really stuck out when we heard these stories was that several of these people suggest that Kwame Kilpatrick really never committed any crimes, or if he did commit crimes, they were minor crimes. Joining us now to talk about the case is Robert Beckman from the FBI. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So that really jumps out at me. You can have a debate of how long Kwame Kilpatrick should be in prison. That's really up to the judge. Your job was to find evidence, and the U.S. Attorney's job was to make the case. So when you hear people say, like Peter Karmanos said, I think, that he maybe had one $500 violation for a campaign contribution or misuse or whatever he said exactly, I mean, do you just go, were you there? What are you talking about? I mean, walk us through this.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of people that have had nice things to say about Kwame Kilpatrick recently, and that's fine. It's every citizen's right to, when you want to speak about people in government, people in the public venue like that, that's the highest level of protected speech. So you can say just about anything you want. In particular, if you're going to say something that's not defamatory, if you want to say something nice about a public official like Kwame Kilpatrick, you could say anything you want, and there are no repercussions. And the FBI is held to a much higher standard than that. We have to base our public comments on actual facts. And the things that I've heard recently, that he took $500, for example, that's just absurdly ridiculous. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the facts. I know you're aware of this because you were down there, and I saw you at the trial. And I know that many, in fact, everybody that I've heard that's not, say, a relative, for example, of Kilpatrick, that has something good to say about him, or they make these various claims, well, he only did this or he only did that. I didn't see any of those people down there at the courthouse for 6 months. So
let's take people back in time a little bit. When did the FBI first find out that Kwame Kilpatrick needed to be investigated, or what triggered an investigation?
It was 2004, and that's a good place to start, because we didn't have one particular person that told us something to start an investigation. The DOJ has rules against opening a case on a public official based on single source information. So in this case, there were many sources. There were people from the public, city employees, some convicted people that had public corruption cases that they themselves cooperated, for example. There were bank records, telephone records. There were even stories in the news media that amounted to a media scandal, and in some cases also amounted to federal crimes. So there were quite a number of different things, a multiplicity of things. We would not open a case on a public official, certainly not an elected public official, based on any one thing. In this case, there were quite a few things to choose from.
And so you begin an investigation, and where does it take you? And you can stick to what was proven in court if you want, or just walk us through it.
Sure. Well, there are lots of components to this investigation. One was there was quite a number of witnesses that were interviewed. My federal partners and I from the IRS and the EPA, CID, we interviewed over 3,000 people in this case. So, basic shoe leather, going out talking to people, finding out what happened. Then there were other people that had cooperated with the investigation, came in with their attorneys to the United States Attorney's Office or before the grand jury and told what they had to say under oath. Okay? And then the IRS did a terrific job of doing a financial investigation and tracking where the money went, and that corroborated in large measure many of these people that had stories to tell about Kwame Kilpatrick. And let me just pause right there and say, it wasn't $500, okay? It was quite significantly more than that. The IRS was able to conclusively show that Kilpatrick had round-numbered cash deposits in his bank account and on his credit cards that totaled $840,000. So, all of the people that had things to say about Kilpatrick extorting people, taking bribes and so forth, if it weren't for that money in his bank account, you might say, well, where did this money go? We know where it went. Went into his bank account, and he spent a large measure of it. Some of it was seized by the government. So
He did also have a good salary. He was in office for a while. He was making probably $200,000 a year, close to it. I mean, that would add up to $840. That's not what you're talking about.
That's not. This is exclusive of that. Okay, so we know what his salary was represented by. These are round numbered cash deposits. You know, $2,000, $5,000, $7,000, always less than $10,000, which would have triggered reporting requirements. So you add up all of that money, which is unexplained, and it totals $840,000.
And how were you able to explain it in court, or how did the U.S. Attorney explain it?
Bribery and extortion. People handing him cash, for example. In fact, you can track Bobby Ferguson's withdrawals, and they spike at the same time that deposits spike for Kilpatrick. It's very easy to see if you sat there in courtroom. Now, people don't have 6 months to go sit down in a court and watch this. I understand that. You may not have 6 months to even sit there and read the blogs as they happened. But if you chose to do that, you would see very, very conclusive evidence showing that Kwame Kilpatrick enriched himself at the expense of everybody else.
Not just Bobby Ferguson enriched himself. The mayor, former mayor, also enriched himself.
Absolutely. While enriching Bobby Ferguson, you know, I always tell people the cost of public corruption is exponentially higher than the benefit to the corrupt public official. You know, so if Kwame Kilpatrick, the U.S. Attorney's Office was able to conclusively show at sentencing that he had bid rigged $73 million in water department contracts. That's just the water department, okay? $73 million. That's the cost to the region, not just the city of Detroit, cost to Southeast Michigan. And you look at the benefit to Kilpatrick, $840,000 that we can prove. Now, I think it stands to reason that it was higher than that. It was higher than $840,000. Somebody hands him a cash bribe, he sticks it in his pocket, walks around and spends it. We're not going to be able to prove that unless we actually find that person who handed him that cash bribe. But I'm just talking about what could be documented and proven that we know for an absolute fact happened. Got put in his bank account, $840,000. Compare that to $73 million in water department contracts, and you see how much greater the harm is compared to the benefit to that public official. That's why public corruption is so reprehensible.
All right, we're going to dig into it more right after this. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Our guest today is Bob Beckman of the FBI. He is the agent who investigated the Kwame Kilpatrick case, and we're talking about that today. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
Let's get into this a little more. We're talking about these bids for work. You said $73 million. What is the scheme? How did the scheme work?
There was an extortion scheme in place where people had to hire Bobby Ferguson or they weren't going to get the job. I've talked to people who went to, say, a pre-bid meeting where you're supposed to go meet with city officials, find out the scope of work, find out what you need to do to put in a reasonable bid on this. Bobby Ferguson would walk into the room and people would get up and walk out because there was no point in spending the money to put in a bid if Bobby Ferguson was competing against you.
This was also backed up in text messages and other things?
Text messages in particular, because those are the words of the defendants in this case. And you can see the text messages themselves where they would say, Ferguson, for example, saying, they've gotten smart, no deal without me. That's a direct quote from Bobby Ferguson about a particular contractor that understands they're under the gun. If they don't hire Bobby Ferguson, they're not going to get a job. They're going to have to lay people off to comply with this extortion demand. So the scheme is pressure, in some cases direct pressure, where the mayor will call in a president of a company and say, fire your subcontractor and put in my buddy here, Bobby Ferguson, or else, or you're done, you know? And backed up by the text messages, backed up by witness after witness, backed up by letters from the water department, Victor Mercado, where he canceled people's contracts, where they didn't comply with the extortion demands. There was one contractor in particular, he gets a visit from Bobby Ferguson who says, hey, I hear you have $15 million in water department contracts coming. The vice president of this company is surprised to see that this guy knows what his status of his contracts are, but he says, okay. And Ferguson says, I want 25% of it. This is a much higher level version of a holdup here. Ferguson comes in and says, I want 25% of your work. This guy's confused at first, and he says, you know what, we already hired our subcontractors. I might consider you on the next job if you want to leave a resume. He says, you don't get this. This contract has not crossed the mayor's desk yet. So if you want the work, you're going to hire me. They throw him out of the office because at that point, they didn't realize the power that this guy wielded. Okay. 2 weeks later, they get a letter in the mail from Victor Mercado, who's the director of the DWSD, Detroit Water and Sewerage Department, and their contracts are canceled. They're going to have to lay people off to comply with this extortion demand. The defenders of Kilpatrick right now, if you weren't there to watch this play out in court, you should know that company was going to lay off city residents. They were going to lay off people that had just gotten jobs to perform this work. Okay, there were people. That company actually had a program where they hired people that were ex-convicts and trained them in highly skilled blue-collar labor to work on these water department contracts. They were going to be out on the bricks because Bobby Ferguson stepped in and shut this down. So that vice president, he testified in court. He went around his sales department in the building and said, everybody write a check for whatever you can afford to cash. And he cashed all these checks. He took $25,000 and stuffed it in the pockets of his suit, went over to Wyoming Street, dumped it out onto Bobby Ferguson's desk and said, I'm sorry, I had no idea. Okay. This right here is the essence of a RICO conspiracy because you have a co-conspirator, Bobby Ferguson, that's not a city official at all, okay? But he wields the power of the mayor's office to the point where he can stroll in and say, give me 25% of your contracts or you're done, okay? That is absurd.
So obviously the citizens of Detroit are being hurt by this because they're not getting the best deal for work getting done. They're also potentially losing jobs that they would be working if they say, sorry, we're not going to go with your contract because you didn't pay Bobby. But the mayor has said many times, nobody ever put any money in his pocket. He never received any money. Is the allegation that Bobby Ferguson then made this money and gave it to Kwame, or did he get direct bribes or both?
Yeah, 100% he made this money and gave money to Kwame Kilpatrick. Absolutely, okay? And let me start with the first part of what you said, the people that are getting screwed are in the city. The people that were in the city got screwed the worst, okay? Because there was federal money that went into these water department contracts. If you paid federal taxes in Arizona, you got screwed by Kwame Kilpatrick. There was state money, state grants that got stolen by Kwame Kilpatrick and got put into state jobs. Okay, if you're a taxpayer in Marquette, you got screwed by Kwame Kilpatrick. Who took it the worst is the people that live in the city of Detroit, because not only did you lose at the federal, state, and local levels, okay, you had business scared away from the city of Detroit by this mayor. I've talked to people at very, very large companies that came here, considered putting a bid in on projects and said, you know what, we're going to sit this administration out. You know, I mean, imagine coming to Detroit, you're thinking, you know, I'm going to build something here and hire some Detroiters, and looks like some untapped potential. Let me start a branch of my business here. Where do we go? How do we get a building permit? And you hire a local consultant who tells you, you know, you got to go over to Wyoming Street and you got to give some money to this Bobby Ferguson guy. What does he do? Is he a city official? No, he's the mayor's best friend, but you know, you got to make that guy happy first. And people say, you know what, I'm going to go someplace else, all right? And they take those jobs and they go somewhere else. All right, so the second part of your inquiry here, was Kwame Kilpatrick enriched by all this criminal activity? Absolutely was. He got $840,000 sitting in his bank account that we can conclusively show was not related to his salary. Plus there are text messages which directly show that Bobby Ferguson was giving money to Kwame Kilpatrick. For example, there's one where he says, go in my safe, there's $7,500 in there for you. There's a second one where they talk about the Book Cadillac Hotel, and Ferguson says, I'm famous now, just need to get some money. And And Kilpatrick says, right, let's get you some. And there's a one-word reply from Ferguson. He says, us. We're sharing. That is a direct quote, okay?
Partners in crime.
Explain that, all right? I mean, you're sharing the money that you're taking from this RICO scheme.
All right, we'll be right back with more of this conversation after this. Welcome back to News Now. Let's get right back into this conversation. So Kwame Kilpatrick has said, nobody bribed me. If someone said they gave me cash, then they're lying. So you talk about Bobby Ferguson paying him. What about other people paying him? Did other people give him cash bribes?
Absolutely. Yeah. Here's a great example of that. A woman testified, Emma Bell. Okay, she was the fundraiser for the Kilpatrick Civic Fund. This is fraud on several levels, okay? The Kilpatrick Civic Fund, it's a 501c4. It's supposed to be a civic do-gooder type fund. And they would send out, this is the way the scheme worked. You had Ms. Bell, who was the fundraiser. She's given a list of city contractors. So let's say, Kevin, you're a water department contractor. You got a water department contract. You figure out where your margins are, how you can save money. There's not a whole lot of money left. And you get a call from somebody who says, you know what, I'm working for the mayor. That's a nice water department contract you got there. The mayor wants to know if he can count on you for a $75,000 contribution to the Kilpatrick Civic Fund. What do you say? Yeah, you could say no, in which case, next year is probably somebody else sitting in your seat, okay? So you give us I'm not kidding, $75,000 checks from water department contractors. They go to the Kilpatrick Civic Fund, and Ms. Bell would take 10% off the top for her fee. That's the legit part of this,
right.
Okay? So 10% off the top. Then it would go into the bank account. Half of it would be taken out in cash, and she would go up into the mayor's suite of offices. They'd go into what they call the barbershop room, a little room off the suite where he had a barber chair in there. His barber would come in and cut his hair, shut the door, and she would fish out this cash and give it to him in a cash kickback. Okay, so $250,000 right off the top in cash kickbacks went through Emma Bell to him. Now, the money that did make it into the Kilpatrick Civic Fund, $500,000 of that was spent on things like, trips, for lavish trips to the Sonanel Resort and so forth, trips with his girlfriend, trips with the family, golf clubs, yoga lessons, bug detecting equipment. I mean, it got so
bug detecting, not rodents. We're talking about sweeping for FBI listening
FBI
in.
Bugs, okay? That kind of detecting equipment. It's just to suggest, this is kind of a comical part of the trial, if there is any comedy relief to this saga, okay? Them trying to explain this in court about all these expenses, okay? They had this expert witness. He was a CPA, elderly gentleman on the witness stand, and he's an expert in 501c4s. So they're throwing these giant checks up on a screen in the courtroom and saying, well, what about this, And they're all, now if they were anywhere near legitimate, we wouldn't be talking about them in court,
right.
Okay? If it was something that went to a legitimate charity. They're all personal things for Kwame Kilpatrick. So first one that goes up is a lease on a Cadillac. Could that be legitimate? So this witness says, well, if he kept a log book and, the portion of the expense that he used to raise money for the charity was accounted for and the personal expense was written off if he used it for personal use. He didn't do any of that, but if he had
right.
done that, it could be legitimate. All right. How about this? And then they throw up yoga lessons. This guy bursts out laughing on the witness saying, it's not even close. This is a defense witness,
right.
Okay? This is the level of ridiculousness that we're talking about here, is just complete petty greed.
He abused several parts of the system for his own personal gain. That was proven in court. But I want to get to this, and this is important because those crimes may have sent him to prison for a certain period of time. But what really hammered him was this conspiracy. It's an extra 20 years in prison. Why is it so clear to you that there was a conspiracy, and why is it so? And why are people who are in one hammered so hard?
Yeah, well, it's because of this. You have the entire fabric of the city breaks down. Okay, if you have the power of the mayor's office and you corruptly delegate that to a co-conspirator like Bobby Ferguson and allow him to use your power to go around and threaten people, that is a huge, huge potential for harm. It'd be like, let's say I have some guy as a consultant, and I say, you know, you can use the power of the FBI, go around and threaten people for your own gain. Somebody knocks on your door and says, I'm working for Beckman at the FBI. You know, it's going to cost you $10,000 to stay out of jail. That would be horrendous. Okay, that is precisely what happened here with the mayor's office. He delegated that power to Bobby Ferguson to threaten people, and it is 100% conclusively proven in those text messages and from that witness stand. And actually, if your viewers, if you're watching this, you have any doubt about what I'm saying, if you Google the Kilpatrick sentencing memorandum, it's out there on the web. You can easily read. It's about 70 pages. The AUSA Mark Chucko that read it did a brilliant job, and it quotes these text messages verbatim. You can read them for yourself. Okay, it's very, very obvious that this is what happened. So, the people that suffered, the people that were punished, people that were victimized are the people that lived in the city for the most part.
Do you need more than 2 people to be in a conspiracy? Were there more than 2 people?
There are far more than 2 people. You got to have at least 2 for a conspiracy. Two people can conspire. There are many more than that in this case. 38 people were convicted in and around Kwame Kilpatrick.
So at the beginning I said sentencing wasn't really your part of this, but one of the claims by people who want Kwame Kilpatrick pardoned is that nobody else who's done similar things like this have been sentenced as harshly.
Yeah, I hear people say that. That's not true either. Okay, you know, Kwame Kilpatrick holds, if you want to say the record for the longest sentence in this type of crime, you know, then I guess you could say that. It's for this type of criminal behavior where it involves, you know, contract fraud, bid rigging, extortion, that sort of thing. There are public officials who've gotten life in prison. You know, like say there's a corrupt policeman in New Orleans who got the death penalty, who killed a witness. Okay, we're not talking about that. We're talking about contracting, bribes, extortion, nonviolent, white-collar type crimes. 28 years being the lengthiest sentence for that type of behavior. But he's not the first person to get 28 years, okay? In fact, one of the things that the judge felt persuasive in this case was the fact that another public official in Cuyahoga County in the Northern District of Ohio named Jimmy DeMora had done similar type things, you know, racketeering, was convicted of racketeering just like Kilpatrick. It was bribery and extortion and that sort of thing. Similar activities, but note, he got less money, okay? He had $451,000, not $840,000, and he wasn't the single executive official of a major metropolis, okay? There are other commissioners down there as well. So that guy got 28 years too. So Kilpatrick is not even the first person to get this sentence.
If you were asked about a pardon, I'm going to put you down as probably a no at this point, 7 years in.
You can check the no box. Now there are 2 types of executive clemency. There's a commutation, where the conviction stands and they just let you out of jail and they say, okay, 7 years is good enough. That's a commutation. And then there's a pardon, which is like it never happened. It just goes away. You were never convicted in the first place. Put me down as a no for both of those, okay? But some people say pardon and what they really mean is a commutation. I'm opposed to all those. I think he got exactly what he deserved and he belongs where he is.
All right, thank you very much for being here. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching.